Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Sarah Day, Senior Technical Writer at LaunchDarkly. Welcome, Sarah, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm drinking my coffee. How are you?
Fantastic. So very good morning to you. So let's get started, Sarah. So just give us a little bit more about introduction about yourself and how did you initially got into documentation, please?
Sure. I've been a professional technical writer for a little over 10 years now, I think. I actually got into documentation because I was halfway through an English degree in college, and I realized I was setting myself up to go to graduate school or become a teacher or a journalist, none of which I wanted to do. So I started looking around for professions that could make me a living wage and also use the one thing that I've ever been able to do well consistently, which is write. And that got me into technical writing.
Super. So with this 10 years of experience, what is your documentation process, either at the current organization or in general, and who is normally involved in such process defining stages?
At my current job, I'm the only technical writer at LaunchDarkly. So a lot of my process is about not blocking other people trying to get their own work done because there's more of them than there are of me. Mm-hmm. So usually I start with, I'll attend like a kickoff or a weekly kind of iteration planning meeting where the project managers will talk about what's coming up in the following week or what the plans are for the quarters. We do a lot of OKR-based work. And I will schedule out my following week or month based on what I hear in that meeting. It usually starts with scheduling sort of interview meetings with SMEs or with the PMs, and then trying to encourage the engineers to write their own first draft documentation because I often don't have time to do that. And once I have that, iterating on it, editing it, and publishing it on our doc site.
Okay, great. So you did mention that you're the only one technical writer. So what are some of the documentation or technical writing responsibilities when you are a sole contributor in a startup?
Sure. A lot of my job is about maintaining consistency and also anticipating upcoming needs. I'm very fortunate because LaunchDarkly has a strong documentation culture in the engineering department. And before I joined, I've been there for a little over a year now. Before I joined, the engineers were very used to writing API and product documentation as part of their sort of just job requirements. And so a lot of my daily tasks are about figuring out where I can improve or sort of make more harmonious our existing documentation set, taking first draft docs, like I said, and bringing them into like the LaunchDarkly sort of voice and tone and our styles, and working on improvements to our tool chain, which is a home-built static site generator that we shipped in the spring of this year.
Okay. Great. So I think you did touch base on some of the important factors, but if you can shed some more lights on what are the important factors to consider when creating documentation, please?
Sure. I mean, I think I always start thinking about who the audience is going to be. That's true of, I think that's one of those things that is true of every documentation job I've ever had. If I'm not writing something that is couched in the right voice for the people I want to read it, then my documentation is going to fail. But also I think, especially at a startup, I have to be really ruthless about time management, which is maybe not a documentation exclusive concern, but still something that affects my daily work pretty substantially. So I have to be very aggressive about saying no to people who want me to do things or setting their expectations accurately about basically when I'll be able to do something for them.
Yeah, understand. Great. So have you seen any kind of reduction in workload since introducing a quality documentation into the process?
A reduction in workload?
Yeah, like I don't know. So for many companies, they might have got a less number of support tickets because they've got a good documentation in front.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think that we don't measure like mitigation metrics as well as maybe we could. I think that often what we've seen is that often in support tickets and often in our early sales calls, people will reference the documentation as having solved a problem for them or answered a question for them already, which to me is a sign of success. Personally, I have seen my workload go up since we have introduced our new documentation site and a bunch of new processes, mostly because we're publishing a bunch more content and there are a lot more people who are aware of the doc site internally and who are like interested in contributing to it or have feedback on it.
Yeah, I understand. Super. So is the documentation with the current organization LaunchDarkly a publicly available one, or is it a private documentation where you need to log in to access it?
It is publicly available. When I joined, we had a knowledge base that was private, but we no longer have that because I advocated to kill it. So our product documentation is available at docs.launchdarkly.com or api.docs.launchdarkly.com. Both of those things are public. And the product documentation at docs.launchdarkly.com is actually open source. We host it on GitHub, and anyone can do a pull request or submit feedback to it through the site itself.
All right. So in that sense, do you currently generate any organic search traffic from your knowledge base?
A little bit. Not a ton. I think like a lot of people, we're seeing more inbound traffic from Google. I think end users are getting used to just typing a search query into their browser address bar. Yeah.
All right. Super. So I think we are good to move to a rapid fire round, but is there anything else you would like to cover before we move on to the rapid fire round questions?
No, I don't think so.
Super. So let's start again, just taking you back to the last 10 years. So who have you learned
feels like 20 years.
Yeah. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
I have to pick one person. I feel like I learned from everyone. Oh my God.
No. Please feel free to thank everybody who comes to your mind. Yeah.
Sure. In my last job, I had a coworker named Max who taught me a ton about effective process. I had never worked on a documentation team before, or at least not a team as big as the one that I did at the company was Pivotal. And I'm very skeptical of process. I'm very skeptical of sort of artificial ritual. I feel like a lot of the time it becomes more about the ritual and less about getting effective stuff done. But Max helped me. He helped me analyze and figure out for myself where I thought a process stopped being effective. And that was no one had ever done that for me before. That was just like a sort of learning by watching him do it. It was very impressive. Let's see. At my current job, Heidi Waterhouse, who actually recommended me to my current boss, she made our email contact and helped, I think, get me hired there. I have learned so much from her about being kind of an influence in the documentation and tech space as a woman, as a queer person, and her sense of her ability to articulate views that I think might be subjective or controversial in a way that's very kind and very accessible and consumable by other people. I think that makes her a tremendously powerful influence and a great speaker. She's done a bunch of conferences. I'm sure you're familiar with her. And I've learned a lot just by watching how she interacts with other people.
Super. So I'm sure you might be reading a lot of resources and materials out there. So can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed very recently?
I honestly don't read that much about documentation at this point in my career. I do short-term research. If I have questions about a specific style guide concern or something like that, I'll do some Googling about it. I'm doing more reading right now about management and about the roles of teams inside organizations because I'm likely to move into management at some point here in the next year or two. And so Camille Fournier's The Manager's Path, for example, Michael Lopp's blog, Rands and Repose, I've been reading a lot of. It's really good. Those aren't documentation specific, but I don't think I'm in a place in my career where I'm reviewing kind of like the fundamental stuff of documentation anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super. So that's absolutely great to know the other types of resources too. So I think I'm very eager to hear this from you. What is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
I have two, actually, and I don't know if a 20-year-old me would listen to either of them, but here goes. The first one would be to learn to radically refine my focus, right? Like when I first started working in startups, I got very interested in product development and how small companies work together and how teams work. And I had come from sort of big soulless corporations, and startups were a completely different cultural and professional experience for me. And I was super overwhelmed, and it was all very interesting. And I think that my job performance could have been stronger if I had spent more time thinking about the documentation work itself and less time figuring out how to work in a startup ecosystem. And so, yeah, I would tell myself to focus differently, figure out how to align the needs of the content that I'm writing to the company that I'm working for more effectively. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, Sarah, I think we are almost coming to an end of this podcast. So any last minute tips or tricks you would like to share with our audience today?
Mostly, I feel bad for being late to this podcast, and I want to apologize again.
Don't worry, Sarah. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of what advice would I give? I think that I would encourage anyone who's doing documentation writing, especially in a small company, to make as many allies as you can. So like there are always multiple stakeholders for a piece of documentation or for a feature or for a product. I think also think about the people within your company who your documentation serves, right? So it's like, it's not just about shipping docs to your end users. It's also about like anticipating the needs of the support team or talking to the sales team about like what they've been losing deals about, at least like reasons that they've heard for not closing deals recently. And if there's like a docs impact, something that you could improve to like make that better for them. Because in a small company, especially as the only technical writer, you need as many friends as you can make. So make all the friends you can.
Mm-hmm. Super. So that's great, Sarah. So once again, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your 10 years journey with us. It was a very short but very crisp podcast. I'm sure the listeners will enjoy it. So enjoy your day. I think you've just started your day. So have a great day ahead.
Cool. Thank you so much. And thank you for being flexible on timing. And yeah, this was a fun conversation.
Super. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.